Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the What's in My Head podcast. I'm joined today by Debbie Dadey. Debbie, how are you?
Hanging in there. Thanks for having
Beautiful.
me, Julian.
Anytime. So there was two books growing up. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the co-author for The Adventures of the Bailey School Kids, one of my favorite books from the elementary school. And I'm so glad because I get to pass it down to my oldest son, and I'm going to pass it down to my youngest son as well, this book series. I remember fifth grade, I want to say, is when I really started to want to go to the Scholastics book fair and look at more than just the posters or just the cool animal books or just the cool pencils and erasers and stuff. This is before cell phones, ladies and gentlemen. So you just have to go with this for me. You have to understand. Pencils were the thing back then. The cool erasers you would get at the Scholastic book fair. But one thing I always wanted to get was the Bailey School Kids books and the Harry Potter books. And we talked briefly about this, and I wanted to bring it up. Actually, before we get to that, when did you and Marcia connect and have this idea for the Bailey School Kids? Do you remember?
I was stalking her, actually. We were both teachers and hadn't met yet. She was at a school in Lexington, Kentucky, and I got married and moved, started teaching at a little school in Versailles, Kentucky. And unbeknownst to me, she had taught at that same school at the position I went to in first grade, and she left and went to another school. Well, I found out why she left. And after teaching there a couple of years, I went to the same school that she was teaching at and took her first grade position because she decided to go to third grade. So I was like stalking her all this time. And then one day we were both, believe it or not, exercising in the school had like this weight room. And we were lifting weights, pumping iron. And we just got to talking. I didn't know her real well because, we were like at different ends of the building. But we chatted and we said, I've always wanted to write a book. And I went, I've always wanted to write a book. And I had written this really terrible book with like line drawings for illustrations. It was really bad. But Marcia is the kind of person who says, well, let's do it. And so the very next day we sat down at a table in our school cafeteria called the teacher's table, and we started writing stories together. So I stalked her until I caught up with her.
Well, I mean, sometimes you just got to follow some people around until something good happens, I suppose. Was the first idea you guys started kicking around collectively, was it the Bailey School Kids, or were you guys just brainstorming?
We actually wrote for about I think it was like a year and a half before we were had a really bad day. we were both teachers. Well, at that time I had become the head librarian, and we were had been writing together for a little bit, and the kids in the school were having one of those days where they were kind of goofing off and acting silly. And I noticed in my library, but when I went over to my friend Marcia's computer lab where we were going to work on a story together during our lunchtime, she met me at the door of her classroom and she said, "These kids are driving me crazy. I can't take it anymore." She said, "I think I'd have to be some kind of monster teacher and have horns and things, have steam out my ears and shoot up 15 feet tall." And when she said that, I went, "Oh, Marcia, I like that idea. I think we should put away this real serious story we've been working on. And we should write a story about a teacher like that." And that's where Mrs. Jeepers from the Bailey School Kids came from. And actually, when we were trying to decide what our characters should look like, we were sitting in my office in my library, and the foreign language teacher came in. And she spoke with an accent, and she had long red hair and long fingernails. And when she came in, we went, "Oh, that's what we want our main character to look like." So that's where Miss Teepers came from.
Does do you remember the foreign language teacher's name?
Yeah, Mrs. Green.
Mrs. Green.
You're listening, Mrs. Green. Thank you so much.
Does Mrs. Green get a royalty check every year?
She should, yeah.
So what was that aha moment like? You guys have this idea for this book series, or at least this one book, and then you have your main character as that teacher. At what point do you take all of this and say, you go to a publisher and say, "I would like to make this a book," or was that just a lot more work in the process, I guess?
Well, we wrote the entire book and thought that was it, one book. And so we sent it to, actually, 1, rejected, 2, rejected, 3rd, Scholastic, and they bought it. And they bought it very quickly. Actually, we were really excited. Marcia came in to my office where we were going to go to lunch, and the phone rang, and it was an editor from Scholastic, and they said, "We really like your story. Vampires Don't Wear Polka Dots. We want to buy it and make it into a book." And I was so excited, I literally danced on the tabletop in my library. I was like, yes. But we didn't think of it being a series. But when that book came out, it did really well. It sold 250,000 copies the first month it was out. And we thought, this is exciting, maybe we could do it again. And so we wrote another book based on the same characters, but it wasn't a series. It was just with the same characters. And we thought, well, how could people know that it was the same kids if there wasn't something alike about it? So that's why we came up with the titles being similar. Vampires Don't Wear Polka Dots, Werewolves Don't Go to Summer Camp, Santa Claus Doesn't Mop Floors. And that's where that came in. And it wasn't until actually the 6th book came along that Scholastic asked us if we would like to write 4 more books in our series. And we said, series, it's not a series, but that's when they turned it into a series with the series logo. And actually, we kept getting rejections for the first 6. We would write, like, Werewolves Don't Go to Summer Camp was rejected twice before we got it right. Ghosts Don't Eat Potato Chips was rejected, I think it was 6 different times.
Wow.
And we changed it totally from beginning to end until we got it right. So it wasn't easy. I'd like to say it was easy, but it wasn't easy. We kept trying, and nobody told us that you should give up when they say no, because we just kept trying. And thankfully, it worked for us.
So what is it like? Obviously, we talked briefly before, and for the fans that listen to my show, they know I cook in the restaurant. What is it like, as far as your profession goes, doing something collective with somebody else like this? Because everybody's got their strong suits and their weak points, and I'm pretty sure you guys cancel each other's weak points, and you guys enhance each other's strong points quite a bit, just working with each other, because you guys have worked together for so long. But what was that initial, I don't even know how to really ask that, other than what was that initial just sit down when you're writing that first book like? Was it hard trying to get each other's, weaknesses and strengths and stuff going? Or what was that like, I guess is what I'm getting at.
I think in the beginning, neither of us knew what we were doing, and maybe it's still true. I don't know, but we were so fledgling in beginning writing that we kind of supported each other. And Marcia is much more literary than I am, and more flowery and more descriptive, and I'm more bare bones, and I like action. And so the two of us together kind of made a whole new writing style between the two of us. And the way we actually did it was we sat down together when we first began, and we wrote saying it out loud. And one of us would say, oh, well, what about this? And then we'd add that, and like, oh, maybe we should do this. And then we would print it all out, and one of us would take it home and like be our homework to look it over and then bring it back and kind of, we say we played hot potato because we would toss the story back and forth between us, especially when I moved away to Texas, and we had to start writing long distance, which was a little bit more challenging because we'd always done it sitting down together.
How would you guys do it back then? Would you guys just call each other on the phone, or?
Well, see, the Vampires Don't Wear Polka Dots came out in 1990. So it was with the 6th book that I had actually moved to Texas from Kentucky, where we had both lived, and taught in the same school. And that was when Scholastic said, we want you to write 4 more books in the series. And we're like, well, we had thought we were done. We thought we would never write again. I can remember standing on the door of my blue house in Kentucky, going like, oh, I guess it's the end of our writing career. We'll never write again. And then we got this call from Scholastic, will you write 4 more books in your series? And we're like, well, we got to figure it out. So, this was before the internet. This is how old I am. Sorry.
No, that's okay.
But we actually faxed our stories back and forth, and we would underline everything that we changed, and we would take turn go back and forth like that. And I don't know how we did it, because when we started, just sending files over the internet, we were just like, I'm going to change it. I'm going to see if she notices. So it was like we were a little bit more freer with our changes, and I think we had learned how to work together. And sometimes Marcia would put some things like. She'd just be riding along and she'd say, and then Eddie, well, she would say something just like totally off the wall. Like Eddie took a flying leap and ran into the wall. I don't know. She would just say something crazy. And I'm like, what? She said, just checking to see if you're paying attention. She would just say totally off the wall things just for fun. But we did have a good time writing those stories and coming up with things that the kids would do. Between all the years of teaching experience that we had, we had some things to draw on.
I got to imagine you had quite a few muses, if you will.
Yeah.
So with that being said, Scholastic comes to you and says, hey, let's do 4 more. I got to imagine that that's life-changing in a sense that you're like, you probably never thought that you would get to write 1, let alone at that time 6, I think is what you said. Like, so 6 total books. You're like, holy crap, this is coming in. Was the pace like, was it the pace quick and heavy, or did they give you enough time to really, write them out?
Well, we were writing for a while, 12 books a year. For several years, and it was between like a Bailey School Kids book one year, and then it'd be like a Triple Trouble next in Bailey School, and then when the Triple Trouble was done, it would be like Bailey City Monsters, and so there were several other series mixed in when we were writing the Bailey School Kids as well. So yeah, it was a pretty tight deadline to write an entire book, and we got to where to make it I guess more streamlined, we would come up with a plan. And I mean, we had always come up with a plan, like a rough outline, but we would do like a couple sentences, what would be in each chapter. Our editor would read it and say, I don't think this works, or yeah, I like that. So we knew before we even started writing it that we had a good plan.
Yeah.
Our editor liked what we were going to do, and I still do that with my newest series, like the Mermaid Tales. I'll send an outline to my editor, and if she doesn't like it, then we'll figure out how we need to change it. She was not gung-ho on my story that comes out next year. It's Mermaid Tales, Titanic Friendship. She did not want me to write a book about the Titanic, but I really, really wanted to. And so I talked her into it, and I hope it does well, or I'm going to be in trouble.
So have you had and I want to get to and for the life of me, I've been trying to figure out since we talked, because I was like, nope, I'm going to remember his name. I'm going to remember that name. And I can't remember the illustrator's name for the Bailey School Kids, the original illustrator.
The original illustrator was John Stephen Gurney. We just recently had a little program with the Carnegie Center in Lexington, Kentucky, where he joined us for a chat. So that was real fun to get to connect with him. We never met John until we had done 25 books together with him.
Wow.
And then we all went on a school visit at the same place. So that was kind of fun to get to meet him. But the program that I was doing had the newest illustrator, because there's actually been 3 different illustrators, and the newest illustrator, I don't know if you've seen it, it's the Bailey School Kids,
yes,
Vampires Don't Wear Polka Dots graphic novel. And so Pearl Lowe did a great job of changing the characters, which was kind of crazy. When we first saw it, we're like, how can you change, our beloved characters that we had, they were our friends and we knew everything about them. And but I think it was good to have a more diverse group of kids for the graphic novel.
Yeah, you give everybody something to look forward to, and everybody sees themselves in each character. So what was it like trying to find, an illustrator? Did Scholastic, and by they I mean Scholastic, did they suggest like, hey, we should put this in there, or was that a conscious effort you guys thought of, like, well, we need to put some art in these books?
Oh no, they definitely came up with the illustrator. We wrote the story. They said, this is what it's going to look like, and this is what the cover is going to be. And we're like, okay. And as we as we got a little bit, further along, we would make suggestions, and sometimes there would be like mistakes on the cover, because sometimes we were writing the books as they were creating the cover, and they would be making the cover, or John would be making the cover just based on like a little sample, like a little paragraph of what the story was going to be about. And sometimes there would be like mistakes, like in Genies Don't Ride Bicycles, there was a supposed to be a wire fence in the story that we had written, but then I think when the cover came out, it was a wooden fence, and so we had to rewrite that part of the book because the cover was already in production. So there was little things like that sometimes that had to change, but yeah, we didn't really get a say in the illustrations. It was just the way it was.
Now, was he a teacher as well, and then he did illustrations on the side, or was he just a straight artist from the get-go?
Yeah, he was, as far as I know, an artist, and still is, and he's publishing. He's not only illustrating books, but he's also publishing books now too, I see.
Oh, that's pretty cool. It all comes full circle. What was that like? You said at Carnegie Hall, you guys did a little reunion?
Oh, no, it's a Carnegie Center in Lexington, Kentucky. They just organized a Zoom for us to do for it was kind of a reunion. It was fun.
Yeah, I mean, I got to imagine it brought back so many memories from seeing those original covers back on the day from the books and the Scholastic book fairs. And I alluded to it just a little bit before we started and before we went down, how these books came to be. But one memory that sticks out very vividly when I was in school, elementary school in particular, was 2 books came out that I always wanted to get. Harry Potter, of course, that was one of the biggest books of all time. I mean, adults, kids, for everything. And the Bailey School Kids was another book. Those are the only 2 books that I can remember saying, hey, I need these books. I want to read these books. But one big thing.
Thanks, I appreciate it.
No problem at all. One issue that I had, though, and it wasn't even my issue, it was a lot of the parents were trying to get both of these books banned and pulled from the Scholastic Book Fair. And especially in Florida, where I'm at, we were a part of the Bible Belt to an extent. It was very, I don't want to say very religious, but it had some religion in it. But they were trying to get these books pulled. You being the co-author, what was that feeling like? I mean, did you have to field any questions with some of these parents, or was everything going strictly through Scholastics at that point?
Well, we were challenged. The Bailey School Kids were challenged in one school district, Noblesville, Indiana, as a matter of fact, where they were hosting, I think, International Reading Association, which I was planning on attending. So I was a little concerned they were gonna show up with like, I don't know, pitchforks or something. I don't know. But the school did something which I did when I was a school librarian. If somebody challenged a book, which happened, I would give them a form to fill out. And the first thing on the form said, you must read the book.
Ooh, I like that.
Entirely.
Yeah.
Because if the people, and it was apparent when Noblesville, Indiana sent the original letters that the parents had shared about wanting those books removed from the school, that they had not read the books. I'm a Christian, and I don't want to write anything that would hurt anybody in any way. And one of the reasons Scholastic trusted us with writing books about different monsters was because I was a librarian and she was a school teacher, and they thought that we were safe to approach these kind of subjects. And one of the books they asked us to write was a book about witches, and we were like, we don't want to write a book about witches. That was kind of scary, because actually when I was a librarian, there was 2 students whose parents were witches and they abused them. So I didn't really want to go there.
Yeah.
So, but Scholastic really wanted us to write a book about witches. So we tried to make it as lighthearted as we could, and we used every fairy tale possible in that book to make it not not horrible, not scary, but more fantasy
Mhm.
and lighthearted. And so I think we've always tried to be a good mix of using folklore and myths and legends to make the stories not something that parents have to be concerned about,
Yeah.
but and to add enough humor in it to make it lighthearted and not scary. That's not to say that, it's for every child, because some children like to read a little bit more scary stuff, than some children should not read scary stuff. And our books, some of them do lean a little bit more toward a little bit of scary, which, I think a parent is right to read their own children's books and make choices for them. I do not think, however, parents have the right to make choices for everyone.
Yes.
Because
100%.
every child is different, and every child, that's why there's so many different kinds of books.
Mhm.
And there's should be choices. But I was proud of the Noblesville people, because they did have parents who were very upset. It was like a group of 6 parents. One of them was the ringleader that got them upset. And from their letters, I could tell they hadn't read the books. Some of them couldn't spell the books, but we won't go there. Spell them correctly, but they did what I thought was the right thing. They had a group of teachers get together, and a librarian, and study the books and make recommendations. And they said that we think these books are appropriate for 3rd graders and would like to continue using them. Well, all the other parents, except I think one, said okay. And that one child had, when our stories were read, had to go to the library and not hear that story, because what that child was doing whenever she got the chance, or he got the chance. They were sneaking that book to read it, because there's nothing that a parent can do more to make a child want to read a book than to say, oh, you can't read that book.
Oh, 100%. Once you make something forbidden, I'm so glad that you're a teacher, because there's one thing, let me just get it real quick. There's one thing that I think I wish more people did. And that's my bookshelf back there. I was actually trying to find my original copy of, man, my mind went blank. I was just trying to find a copy of The Vampires Don't Wear Polka Dots. I don't know where my mind was going. I think my oldest son might have it in his room, but I couldn't find it. The one I bought from the Scholastic Book Fair back in the day when I was going through elementary school, I still have it. And I thought it was on my shelf, but when I came up here for the Zoom call, I was going to look for it. I'm like, look, I'm an OG fan. I'm an original fan. I got my original book here, and then I can't find it. So, but one thing that
I'm glad that he's reading it. That's awesome. Tell him I said hi.
I will. One thing that I absolutely love, and I don't think there is enough of it, is good teachers that care enough, right? And that's not a slight against teachers, because it was just my personal I guess it was just my trial or my tribulations through school. I didn't have very many teachers that felt like they cared about us, really. I had 2 or 3 that I can specifically point out. My Italian teacher, Miss Ray, my favorite teacher of all time. She actually, I'm not going to get up and get the other book, but I would always read the same books through high school. And I wasn't reading at a high school level, because I just didn't care about reading. I didn't really care about school. I didn't want to be there. I wanted to play basketball. I wanted to cook. I wanted to hang out with my friends. That's all I wanted to go to high school for. And I would always skip. Usually you skip out of school, but I would always skip into her class, because her lunch break was the next period was my class with her. So I'd be able to do the schoolwork that I neglected to do, and then she would let me turn in for late credit. And then she would always see me reading like the same couple of books, right? So I would read Holes. I believe Louis Sachar wrote that one. And then Maniac McGee from Jerry Spinelli was one of my favorite books of all time. And I would always just read one of those 2 books. And then she looked at me, she's like, what are you doing? And I was like, reading. What are you doing? And she was like, I've seen you read that book 3 times in the 3 years you've been here already, because I'm junior or senior, somewhere around there. And I was like, yeah, but I like it because I like how it ends. I'm not going to be disappointed. I like the story. It's fun. It's cool. And I've been reading this book since the 5th grade. And then she's like, why don't you try something different? And then she had a little bookshelf right by her little podium, and she's all of like 5 foot tall. So she would have this podium that she wasn't really tall enough to see over. So she had a little step to get on. And then so she takes this book, and I'm about 6'2", 6'2.5". So she takes the book of Mice of Men off there and then throws it on my desk. And she's like, read this. And I think it's like 60, 70 pages. It's a very small book. It's something I could read within 45, 50 minutes. So I read it. I'm like, holy crap, this is one of the greatest things I have ever read in my life. And then I was like, what do I do now? And she was like, well, go read something else that's your level. And I was like, I don't know what to pick. What should I pick? And then she took one of her personal books. And I can't remember what Stephen King book it was, but she took it out of her bag. And she's like, I just finished this. Read this and bring it back to me. And I was like, oh my God, I was blown away. I was like, if this is what books really are, I mean, I've been holding myself back by only reading these 2 books every year. So she was one of my favorite. She's my favorite teacher of all time. And I had another teacher named Miss Burgett. She's my culinary school teacher in high school. And she would always just challenge me to do better. Like, that was okay, but you could do better. Come on, man. You need to be a leader. If you want to do this, you have to try. You can't just coast through life. And then the one teacher that I always think back to, and it's 5th grade, and she's no longer here, unfortunately. She was an older teacher when I was in elementary school, but her name was Mrs. Gravely. And then she would read, and I don't know if you've ever read this book or heard of this book. This is actually Mossflower, but it's Redwall by Brian Jacques.
Oh yeah, my oldest son loved Redwall. I read it aloud to him, and I thought, because he was going to a point where he didn't want to read, and I said, well, I don't want to read this. But I actually was at a conference or something where Brian Jakes spoke, and he was so good. I thought, oh, I'm going to read this to my oldest son, and I think he might like it. And I didn't think I would, but I liked it. We were like stealing the book to read the next chapter to Redwall's a good book.
It really is. And then I was this close to being actually able to talk to Brian a few years before he died. And then he was going through some I don't know if it's medical issues. He was just going through some issues, and he answered my email, which I was super grateful of. I just wanted to say, hey, I love this. I really appreciate it. And I told him the story, Mrs. Gravely, every class or every time during lunch, because you could eat lunch in the cafeteria, or you could take a lunch and go back up to the class, and then she would read to us essentially during her off period. Right. So every character had a different voice. And then she would sit on this stool. Right. And then she would do this. She would sit on the stool and she would turn around as Clooney the Scourge, which was the evil rat. And then she would have her eye covered and her lip would be snarled. And she would talk in these really cool voices. And then she would use her hand as a claw. Yeah. So it was always so vivid. It was always so fun. And then we had I can't remember the coach's name, but that's how I found out about Maniac McGee. Was the coach, our 5th grade coach. He was this little Italian guy, and he taught us how to play bocce ball. I don't know if you've ever heard of bocce ball or played bocce ball.
Oh yeah.
But he taught us how to play bocce ball, and he also taught us how to gamble on the side. He was like, if you want to make money, you just put $1 down. This is how us old timers do. Yeah. So it was the 90s, so it's okay. But so he would come up during like once a week, and he would read us a chapter from Maniac McGee, and that's how I found out about that book. So it's just a long-winded way of saying like what you and Marcia have done, not only for writing these books, but having an invested interest in these kids' lives that you guys have taught. Or I'm pretty sure you being a librarian and a teacher for a little while as well, that you recommended some books to somebody that might have been just like me, that didn't know what to look for, didn't know what was out. Everybody's got to be challenged. So I got to assume that you help somebody along the way is what I'm getting at. And if we need anything more now than ever before, it's teachers like yourself, teachers like Mrs. Gravely and Miss Ray and Miss Burgett. We need teachers like that to have an invested interest in our kids' lives, because this is the future.
And librarians too. I'm a big supporter of librarians. I think we need more librarians in schools, and not just paras, not just assistants. A lot of school systems have taken to like hiring one librarian for like 10 schools. Yes. Well, of course, one librarian cannot be split between 10 schools, but that's what they do. And then they have just an assistant. But a good library can make a huge difference in a school. And actually, that's how we came up with the idea to write about monsters. That that coupled with having a really bad day, there were in my library, there were kids who practically fought over this one group of monster books, this one series about how they made different monster movies.
Mhm.
And the kids loved those, and I'm like, wow, kids really like to read about monsters. But I always thought that there's a book for every kid, and it might not be the same book. It's a very rare book that every kid will want to read, but there's so many different books that there's got to be a book for that kid. And when they came to my library, I was bound and determined to find something that they would love, and hopefully I did some. Yeah.
I got to imagine you did. And I mean, you touch so many lives with these books, I'm sure, because I guarantee there's millions of fans like myself that grew up with these books. These books were, I don't want to use that word disparagingly, but these books were our religion growing up. We look forward to these books. We would break open these books like, oh man, I loved this, But going back just for a second, because there was something I wanted to hit on. You said you were writing 12 books a year at one point?
Yeah, for I'm not sure how many years, but yeah, I kept Marcia, and Marcia was still teaching at the time, so it kept us pretty busy. And I was, had my children coming along, and so we were pretty busy, but it taught us to write fast. I'm not sure if it taught us to write well, but it taught us to write fast, and it was exciting. It was a lot of fun.
With that being said, 12 and 12 months, that's a book a month. I mean, what are these books like? 60, 70 pages, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less?
Yeah. About, I think 90 with illustrations and stuff. So
okay. With that being said, you guys don't have time for writer's block, I got to imagine. However, I got to imagine that you've flirted with writer's block. You and Marcia have. In any creative field, you get drained. It's a battery, right? So you can't be at 100% all the time. So what are some of the things that you guys would do to combat that writer's block or get through that writer's block?
Well, the nice thing about working with a partner is when you run out of steam, it's like, ta-da, it's your turn. We usually wrote one or two chapters, and then we would. When I moved away, we would do alternate chapters. Like I would a lot of times start them, and using our outline and our plan, I would write the first two chapters, and then I would send them to Marcia, and Marcia would like read them over, and we'd be kind of like each other's editors, and she would make suggestions or changes, and then write two more chapters, and we'd go back and forth like that. So I had enough energy to do, one or two chapters, and then it's like, okay, it's time for you to be creative, Marcia. So I think having that support system really helped, because if we ever felt like quitting, which we did sometimes especially before we sold our first story, we'd feel like, well, I felt like, well, I'm not going to quit if Marcia's not going to quit. What would she think of me? So I was like, I couldn't quit if she wasn't going to quit. So we were, we supported each other and kept each other going. And if we were kind of down about writing, we had the other one to kind of pick us up a little bit and carry the load and cheer us up. And because writing is a very solitary and kind of a lonely kind of a thing, it's
Yes.
It is, and it can be depressing when you get rejections, which we've got plenty of those through the years. And I think it takes sometimes a pretty tough person to keep going, and if you don't have anybody supporting you, that can be very hard. Now, I've always belonged to the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, SCBWI, and scbwi.org on the internet, but it's a kind of a great support system too, and they have all these local, state, regional, national, and international conferences that are really great to go to. So if anybody's starting writing, those are great. That's a great organization belonged to. Marcia and I even wrote a book about everything we wished we knew when we first started writing. We put into this book, and it's called Writing for Kids, the Ultimate Guide. So we wish we'd had that when we started out. We would have saved a lot of trouble and heartache.
Beautiful. When you guys are writing those 12 in a year, and you said you would start the first 2 chapters, she would send it off, and you guys would start bouncing back and forth, and you guys would just switch. Were you guys ever writing more than one book at one time?
Yes, but not the same book.
Mhm.
Like, it would be too difficult to write 2 Bailey School Kids books at the same time, because you could get things mixed up. But if
Mhm.
you were writing 2 totally separate kind of books, that we could do that.
Out of all of the series that you guys have collaborated on and the series that you've written, what feels like a pair of shoes that you can just slip right into those characters? Is the Bailey School Kids, is it easy to slip into, or do you still find challenges trying to get into that mindset?
The Bailey School Kids are good friends. They are definitely good friends. But anytime we were writing a book in a series that maybe we hadn't written recently, we would reread the books in that series to kind of get us in that mindset, and that was very helpful. And I still do that if I haven't written something on that level. I'll read a lot of books on that level to get myself into that mindset. And basically, though, I have a 3rd grade mentality, so I don't have any problem usually in that area. People say, well, do you use like a dictionary, a special dictionary or something to get the words for the 3rd grade? And I'm like, no, that's where I fall. 2nd, 3rd grade is really easy for me.
That's the money maker, is my 3rd grade mentality. Going back, and the only reason I asked this question, because I've had a lot of writers on here for TV shows and movies and animators and stuff like that. And one show in particular, I don't know if you ever saw it or heard about it. It's from the late 90s, early 2000s to the mid 2000s as it's run, but it was a show called Ed, Edd and Eddy. I don't know if you ever remember watching. Okay, so one thing.
I have kids. I remember that.
Well, tell your kids when you get off here if they want to go and check out my podcast. I've had almost the entire cast and crew on, and it's fun going down memory lane. But I didn't bring that up just to do a shallow plug, Debbie. I brought that up because one of the things I absolutely got a kick out of was one of the writers. His name is Mike Kubat. And I believe it was his daughter that he was driving to a soccer game one time, and they had almost the entire team with some of the parents in there too. So they had some kids and some parents in his huge SUV. And they were talking about Ed, Edd and Eddy. They didn't know that Mike was the writer. And the parents were talking about it, and they were defecating on it really bad. Yes.
Oh,
Yes. And then he's just sitting there smiling because he thinks it's funny, right? So, and of course, the only one that knew was the kids, because the kids all watched it. And then his daughter is in the car. So she's just like, God, don't say anything. Don't say anything. Please don't say anything. Right. So he's telling me this story. And then that led to something else. And then we were talking about, what was your favorite letter you ever received from a parent, both hate mail and good mail? And I don't know if it came up on the podcast because he's like, man, I got to think about it. So it might've been something I heard after I hit record. But it went into detail about how horrible this show was for kids. The only reason I bring that up, like I said, was you said you got a bunch of rejections. Were they all standard rejections? It was the same. It looked like everybody just copied and pasted it, or did it seem like somebody put some heart and soul into rejecting your books?
Oh, different books? You mean other books besides Bailey
Yeah,
School?
whenever you would get a reject, because you said, what was it? You got like 4 or 6 rejections for one of the Bailey School Kids books.
Oh, yes. Well, after we had started writing the Bailey School Kids for Scholastic, any rejections we got from them were not form letters. They were actual letters with real words that were thought out and not just a standard form letter,
Yeah.
but because I've gotten those as well for different things when I was first starting. But I've gotten to the level now that any rejection I get is an actual nice letter. But yeah, when we were first starting out, before we had some success, we got plenty of those form letters, and there's, they kind of crush you a little bit. And even now when I get letters, hope my editor's not listening, asking for me to change things, I'm like, I have to put it, I read it, and then I'm like, oh, that's wrong, and I have to put it away for a little bit, and then I'll read it, and I'm like, maybe she's got a point there. It's kind of like, this is your baby and you don't want to change it. But writing is really a collaborative effort.
Mhm.
And I say that because I've had writing partners for with Marcia, and I also wrote 2 books with my oldest son. And so I say that not in a over just collaborating with them. It's a collaboration with your editor.
Mhm.
And if you have a good editor, it's a working relationship where you're back and forth, and the only thing you're trying to do is make that book the best it can be.
Yeah.
And so I think if people go in with a chip on their shoulder, like, oh, can't change it, it's perfect the way it is, well, great for them. If anybody can write a story and it's great without having to change a thing, that's wonderful. But there's very few people that have that ability, I think, because there's always, I think, an opportunity to make a story better. And so that's hopefully what I've learned to do is accept editors' comments. And but if I'm really firm about something that I really want to do, I've also learned to stand a little bit on my own 2 feet. I remember one book was called Ghosts Do Stomp in Puddles. It was a Bailey School Kids Junior chapter book. And I'd written a line that said, Eddie said, "There's no such thing as a potty ghost," which I thought was kind of funny.
Yeah.
For a second year. This was for second graders. And my editor said, well, second graders don't say potty. I'm like, I know, but it's funny. And she made me change it to there's no such thing as a toilet ghost or something like that. I'm like, I'm still mad that I changed that. Why did I do that? I should have stuck to my gun. So I think there's some things that, you can change, and some things you shouldn't change. And that was one thing I wish I hadn't changed.
Oh, 100%. And I just started writing, and it always sounds pretentious when I say that. So when I started this podcast, during COVID, when we all got sent home from the restaurant, I started this little thing where I was showing people how to cook, right? So I just needed some kind of outlet, because I had heard this quote one time, and I apologize to the fans that have heard me say this multiple times, but there's nothing worse than being a creative person and having nobody to share it with, essentially, like no outlet, right? So like a lot of my friends and colleagues and coworkers that were in the restaurant industry, a lot of us had to do something with food. We had to share it somehow. We had to get all of that, I don't want to say emotion or frustration. We had to get all of that angst out when it came to cooking. We had to share it with something. We had to share it with somebody. So I started this little food thing, and it was called the Vanilla Gorilla Kitchen, because my original goal was to have a food truck. And then once wife had the baby, or we found out we were pregnant last year, everything completely changed. I was like, I don't want to spend any more time. I was in the military for 7.5 years. I already spent enough time away. I don't want to do that with my youngest son now. I was like, it wasn't right for my oldest one, but it was a job I needed, right? So I had no choice. And so I did the Vanilla Gorilla Kitchen, and I'm trying to get back into it. It's just work's been crazy. But one thing I absolutely loved doing was teaching people how to cook, because cooking is very personal, right? A lot of people don't like to do it because they don't want to mess up. They don't want to put too much salt in there or burn something, because with cooking, one bad meal, for somebody to make one bad meal, it might completely kill them for cooking forever. Like most people just step away from it. They're like, I don't want this heartache. I don't want this. I don't want these trials and tribulations. So what I like to do was just do these little Facebook Live videos and teach people everything I've learned since the age of 12 over the last 20 years, what I've learned with cooking. And a lot of people loved it. And then that led to writing recipes and blogs. And then it led to this podcast. And this podcast led to me writing an article. And the only reason I bring this up is because you're just talking about how it's collaborative, or you need people to tell you when something's good and when something's bad. And with food, I always go for the bad right away. I want to know what was so bad about it. I want to know what I could have done to make it better, because it's just how my brain works. If I don't knock it out of the park this time, rest assured the next time I do this, it's going to be 10 times better than what I did before. So with writing, I didn't realize like how personal, like I was going to take any kind of negative.
It hurts, doesn't it?
It wasn't even negative. So my buddy, he's like, hey, just write an article about one of your favorite cartoons. So I read an article about one of my favorite cartoons. And then he's like, so I had one of my friends that he's completely objective. He's a third party. I've never met him. He's never met me. He's like, I had him read it because he's a fan of cartoons as well. And this is what he had to say. And I'm like, oh man, I just want to strangle this guy. I want to hit him in the eye. I was like, he was, and then I put it away for a week or two. I didn't think about it. And then I went back and read his comments, and I went back and read my paper or my article. And I was like, man, I know why that one stung so much, because everything he said was correct. I suck at this, but it was my first article. And I like seeing that. And that's what's so fun about podcasting and so fun about stuff when you put something out there, right? With my first podcast to this one, I've been doing this for over a year now. And when I go back and listen to the first couple podcasts I did, I cringe just listening. I'm like, oh man, I'm a bumbling idiot there. Like, why couldn't you say, you know, that word? Why couldn't you say that? So you start to see, but you see growth. You're like, so then I look 3 months after I first started. I'm like, oh man, I'm getting a little bit better. 6 months, 9 months. Now I'm here in a year. Yeah, I still make mistakes, still screw up. I'm still trying to write. I'm still trying to write the first draft be the best draft, right? I don't want to have to do edits and stuff. But like you said, there's nobody out there. Yeah, you know, so it's definitely a learning curve.
And I think kids in school have to learn that too, and teachers sometimes too. They expect, like on tests, they have to write something and they expect it to be perfect for this test. But you know, it's a process. It's not just you write it and it's perfect the first time. It's a process. You have to it's layers, you know, adding layers to make it better. Yeah, I would love it to be perfect the first time. That would be great.
It really would. And then I never really noticed it until probably now, you know, and this will be like the last kid story I say, but my oldest son, he played basketball for a little while. And that was a sport I played from the age of 6 until I still play it. I won't play anything like too crazy because I don't want to get hurt and then not be able to go to work and then not be able to pay my bills. So I got to make sure I don't do anything crazy. I'm not a kid anymore. So a few years ago, my son picked up a basketball and he's like, Dad, I think I want to play. And I was like, all right, cool, no problem. I did this. I was like, just do what I do and you know, you'll go from there. And then I started watching him. He's like, so how am I doing? I'm like, man, maybe I'm thinking in my head, I'm like, maybe this sport isn't for you. I'm thinking, I'm like, I was like, just watch what I do. I found out that it's so like, especially now in today's day and age, like everybody wants everything to be perfect right out of the gate, right? Everybody wants somebody to have already practiced 10,000 hours at something. Like you should be proficient. You've done this twice. You should know how to do this correctly. And I didn't realize it. And I'm like, man, that's unattainable. You can't come out of the gate first draft. Stephen King doesn't come out of the gate first draft. I'm pretty sure at this point in time, I'm pretty sure he'd get on the second one, but that's neither here nor there. I mean, he's going through 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 passes. But ladies and gentlemen, just know that anything worth doing is going to take some time to get used to, and it's going to take some time to get proficient in, and will for sure take some time to master. Bruce Lee had a great quote, and I'm going to butcher it, but here's the gist. He's like, I wasn't afraid of that guy that could do 10,000 different kicks. I was afraid of that guy that did one kick 10,000 times because he built up that proficiency over 10,000 hours. It's the 10,000 hour rule that I was just mentioning earlier. It takes time to get good at your craft. If it was easy, everybody would do it, right? So, but as we start to wind down here, because we've almost been going for an hour, I don't want to keep it too much longer. When you sit back and look at everything you've accomplished, you and Marcia have accomplished together, and your accolades on the solo side as well as writing with your son. I bet you that was pretty cool, wasn't it? Getting to write with your son. Yeah.
He did not like it at all at first. He was like, no. But then then we did have a good time writing them together.
Beautiful.
Slime Wars and Slime Time were the two books that we wrote together.
Beautiful. I got to. So I know you said before we had a little flub up there, but I know you said you were having two books come out very, very soon. What were those two books called, and when did they come out?
Well, I just actually had two books come out this summer.
Beautiful.
The Bailey School kids had the first graphic novel come out.
Mm-hmm.
Vampires Don't Wear Polka Dots, and Pearl Lowe did the adaptation. And then Sleepover at the Haunted Museum was number 20 in the Mermaid Tale series that I have with Simon & Schuster. And next year, there's number 21 in that series. The Mermaid Tale series has a Titanic Friendship coming out. And I'm pretty excited about that because I've always wanted to have a character with in a wheelchair on the front of a cover of a book, and there's going to be a mermaid who is in a wheelchair of sorts on the cover of that book. So I'm kind of really excited about that. And there's another graphic novel coming out from Scholastic called Frankenstein Doesn't Plant Petunias.
Yes.
And yes. I've seen the artwork, and it's really a lot of fun. So I'm pretty excited about that too.
Beautiful. And the last thing I always like to throw out there, where can fans of your series come and find you on the social medias and say, hey, I really love this, I can't wait to see this? Or if they just want to come by and say, hey, I like what you did, where can they find you?
Oh, well, I hope everyone will go to DebbieDadey.com. And if you're a kid listening to this, you can actually write to me on the Kids Talk page, and I answer you every morning of the week, of the school work week. I answer you in the Debbie Talk section, so you can get a quick answer to any question you might have. Give me suggestions on my website. Parents can go to my Facebook page, Debbie Dadey, facebook.com/Debbie Dadey, and I'm also on Twitter. Those are the three main places you can contact me or say hi, and where I put announcements of anything that's coming up.
Beautiful. And this is the last question. It's the most important question because you talked about it, and I don't know why I didn't even bring it up because Kentucky is a hotbed for basketball. So are you strictly just college, or do you have a pro team you follow? Because I am a Orlando Magic fan myself. So
oh, I'm Kentucky all the way for basketball. Sorry.
It's perfectly fine. So
but I did live in Colorado for a while, and Pennsylvania as well. So, a bit of a Steelers, a bit of Eagles, a bit of, Dallas Cowboys too. So those would be my proteins, I guess.
Yeah. Beautiful. Well, Debbie, it's been a blast talking to you. I hope you had fun, because I know I did. It was nice to finally put a face to the stuff that I used to read way back in the day, and that my kids are going to be reading very, very well. The youngest one, he'll be reading in a couple years, but the oldest one, he's read quite a bit of your stuff. So.
Oh, well, thanks, Julian. It was nice chatting with you.
Anytime. Well, she's been Debbie. I've been Julian. This has been the What's in My Head podcast, and this has been another huge piece of your childhood. Good night.